At least 5 people injured today in Myanmar after renewed anti-coup protests in its second largest city, Mandalay. Philip Sherwell from the Sunday Times is standing by for us with the latest. Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny loses his appeal. He had been sentenced to nearly 3 years in prison for parole violations. That sentence now upheld. The charge is trumped up, say his supporters. And as President Biden expresses willingness to revive the 2015 nuclear deal, Iran has renewed calls to lift U.S. sanctions. Meanwhile, the head of the UN nuclear watchdog will visit Tehran as it threatens to scale back cooperation. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Julia Kim. At least 5 people have been injured today in Myanmar after a police raid in its second largest city, Mandalay. Authorities fired rubber bullets at protesters gathering to stop arrests in a shipyard, according to reporters from Agence France Presse. Now, protesters were back on the streets again to demand the release of Aung San Suu Kyi. It comes after the coup's first fatality, a 20-year-old woman who had been shot in the head. Well, let's go live to Philip Sherwell, correspondent for the Sunday Times. Philip, what more do we know about this renewed violence today?
Yeah, these seem to be the most violent clashes so far. There are several people have been injured. There are actually reports of deaths. There are some pictures that seem to show protesters, and including a young boy, who aren't showing signs of life on stretchers, but obviously it's too early to say. What was happening up there is what's happening across the country. Striking workers, government workers, are refusing to operate for this military government since the coup, and protesters are coming out to sort of defend them. So when the military go in to try and arrest strikers and say, you know, if you don't go back to work, we're going to cart you off, protesters from the neighborhoods are trying to defend them. Now, this was happening at a port in Mandalay, at a dock in Mandalay, and the confrontations got very nasty. Certainly rubber bullets. There are reports possibly of live bullets, and it's ongoing, and it looks very unpleasant. Several casualties, and this does come just a day after the first confirmed fatality, as you mentioned, a young woman who'd been shot the previous week. She'd been on life support. She passed away yesterday in Naypyidaw. There's going to be her funeral tomorrow. It's going to be another flashpoint. So really things are getting much tenser, much uglier, and the fears of a military crackdown are growing.
Now, we're hearing also several ethnic groups saying they're breaking off dialogue with the military and supporting the civil disobedience movement. What more can you tell us about this?
Yeah, this is very important for the opposition, who are trying to create an umbrella movement to sort of refuse to cooperate with the junta. These ethnic groups had previously signed ceasefires. There's many. There's a mosaic of ethnic groups in Myanmar, and many of them have been fighting for 70 years as insurgencies. But a group of them had, in 2015, signed a ceasefire with the military and the previous government. And they are now saying that although they're not breaking off the ceasefire, they're going to break off any dialogue, and they are throwing their weight behind the civil disobedience movement, which is this protest movement. And so in their areas, expect greater opposition and greater protests and government operations just not functioning. And this is really going to stretch the military, because they're going to have protests on the streets of the major cities in the ethnic Burmese heartlands. And then they've got these ethnic groups who are now also refusing to cooperate with them. So there is a sort of burgeoning sort of movement now against the junta, and this is the goal of the opposition. They just want to cripple this government. They want to paralyze it. They want to make the country ungovernable. So important steps today.
Okay, Philip Sherwell, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for that update. Philip Sherwell there speaking to us. Now, a Moscow court has upheld a ruling to jail Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Navalny was sentenced earlier this month to nearly 3 years in jail for parole violations, a decision he says is politically motivated. The EU has said it's ready to impose sanctions on Russia over his imprisonment as well as his poisoning last year. France 24's Theo Mertz has the latest from Moscow.
As expected, the court has upheld his prison sentence. They've slightly reduced the time he will spend in jail, reduced it by about 6 weeks, so he'll be spending 2.5 years in prison, but absolutely no surprises there. As he has done at previous hearings, Mr. Navalny used his appearance in court today as a sort of political platform. He wasn't really defending himself. He wasn't really asking for this decision to be rethought by the judge. He was saying that he wants Russia to be free, and not only free, he wants Russia to be happy. He was saying that he wants wealth to be distributed more equally, and he was saying that he wants living standards to improve. So this was certainly a political event on both sides, the authorities seeking to jail or indeed jailing their most outspoken opponent, and then Mr. Navalny using it really as a political platform.
Well, Navalny will also make a second appearance in court later today, this time for allegedly defaming a World War II veteran. The 94-year-old man was in a video to promote reforms that would allow Vladimir Putin to remain in power for another 15 years. The court is to decide within the next couple of hours, and we'll bring that decision to you when it drops. Now, America is back. The transatlantic alliance is back. The words of President Biden as he took to the world stage during the virtual Munich Security Conference. His administration signaling a return to multilateralism after 4 years of Donald Trump. It's already rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement and halted the U.S. exit from the World Health Organization. Claire Rush has this report.
Signaling the end of the America First era. In his first major international address since taking office, U.S. President Joe Biden sought to reassure allies, telling the Munich Security Conference that Washington is now more committed than ever to its partners.
America is back. The transatlantic alliance is back. And we are not looking backward. We are looking forward together.
Looking to turn the page on Donald Trump's unilateral approach to foreign policy, the Biden administration is renewing multilateral engagements. It says it's ready to re-enter talks to salvage the Iran nuclear deal, and it's officially rejoined the Paris Climate Accord, both agreements that Trump had withdrawn from. Biden also announced the U.S. will soon begin releasing $4 billion in aid for COVAX, the international program to distribute coronavirus vaccines to poor countries. And the U.S. president called Washington's commitment to NATO unshakable, further breaking with Trump, who had spurned the transatlantic alliance. Welcome words to European leaders after 4 years of strained ties under Trump. Some allies, however, are wary of returning to an American-dominated world order.
I do believe that the best possible involvement of Europe within NATO is to be much more in charge of its own security and to be much more in charge of this strategic autonomy.
While hailing the U.S. foreign policy shift, many in Europe are also seeing this moment as an opportunity to rebalance transatlantic relations.
Well, during that conference, Biden also urged European allies to curb Iran's, quote, destabilizing activities in the Middle East. This a day after committing to talks to revive the Iran nuclear deal that Trump abandoned. Iran says it will stop visits from the UN's nuclear watchdog on Tuesday if the US doesn't lift sanctions. Ahead of that deadline, the head of the agency, Rafael Grossi, will visit Tehran today. France 24's Reza Sayeh has the latest on the Iranian reaction.
Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, said Tehran needs to see actions and not words. In other words, Tehran wants to see the European signatories in Washington together take a significant and substantial step towards restoring the nuclear deal and, just as importantly, lifting some of those U.S. sanctions. At this point, from Tehran's point of view, that hasn't happened. What has happened over the past few days are some statements and some developments that can be viewed as positive and encouraging. For example, on Thursday, the Biden administration rescinded a request by former President, U.S. President Donald Trump last year to the UN Security Council to reimpose UN sanctions against Iran. That has been terminated by the Biden administration. That could be viewed as good news. Also on Thursday, after that meeting with the European signatories and the U.S. Secretary of State, a joint statement was released saying that all parties are committed to restoring the nuclear deal. So some positive developments But again, from Tehran's viewpoint, it's not enough. They want to see action from Washington, the European signatories, a step towards lifting sanctions. And until and unless that happens, they're going to move forward with expanding what they call their peaceful nuclear program. All eyes on Tuesday when Iran has set a deadline. They say unless sanctions are not lifted, they're going to stop the so-called short notice inspections by the UN nuclear watchdog, and that has a lot of people concerned. So important few days coming up.
Well, moving on now, and French Health Minister Olivier Véran says more measures, including a possible local lockdown, will be necessary to curb the spread of COVID-19 in the French city of Nice and the surrounding region. It comes after President Macron reportedly said that the next 8 to 10 days will possibly be crucial in deciding whether to tighten national restrictions. The country is reporting an uptick in infections in several cities, fueled by the more contagious new variants. Camille Nedelec reports.
This is the latest French hospital to reach breaking point. The Pasteur in Nice has an ICU occupation rate of more than 90%. The infection level in the city is the highest in France, with over half of cases due to the British variant.
Et donc c'est sûr que la pression est énorme et qu'il y a une certaine lassitude qui s'installe parce qu'on ne voit pas de fin à cette affaire.
Nationwide, 36% of cases are the British strain and 5% are the South African variant, but some cities are harder hit than others. Around 3/4 of new infections in Dunkirk, Mayotte and the region of Moselle are new strains, and Germany is considering closing its border with France as a result. Healthcare workers think these variants could be driving a spike in infections, as they're highly contagious, prompting authorities to prolong quarantine for new coronavirus cases from a week to 10 days.
Ça nous inquiète, nous, parce que les gens, en fait, savent qu'ils ont été en contact avec quelqu'un que 2 ou 3 jours après, et ils sont déjà contagieux. Et ils ont déjà contaminé d'autres personnes. Donc pour la sphère familiale, pour la sphère professionnelle, c'est compliqué.
France has been walking the tightrope between staving off a lockdown and controlling infection rates, which have remained stubbornly high but steady. These new variants could be about to tip the balance. The French government is set to decide within the next fortnight whether or not to implement a third national lockdown.
Argentina's health minister has stepped down after reports that his friends were able to skip the line for a COVID-19 vaccination. It comes after a veteran journalist told a local radio station that he was able to get an injection after calling him up. Karis Garland has more.
Inés González Garcia claims it was a misunderstanding, but Argentina's health minister was forced to resign on Friday after allegations people were able to jump the queue for COVID-19 vaccines by using connections. He said those that had the jab were able to sidestep protocols due to unintended confusion on the part of his secretary.
I take this opportunity to reconfirm my position on the issue that occurred, that the vaccinated people belong to groups included within the target population of the current campaign.
The resignation comes after a 71-year-old journalist told local radio he had received the vaccine after requesting it from González Garcia, who he referred to as his old friend. There have also been reports that mayors, lawmakers and people close to political power received injections despite not being entitled to them. Argentina started inoculating some people over 70 on Wednesday. It's not the only South American country to face a scandal over corruption and access to vaccines. In Peru, some 500 government officials have been charged, including the former president, accused of getting vaccinated ahead of their turn.
And finally, Japan's Naomi Osaka has won the Australian Open, beating American Jennifer Brady 6-4, 6-3 in the final. It's her 4th Grand Slam victory. The 23-year-old becomes the first female player to win her first 4 major tournament finals since Monica Seles in 1991. That's it from us. More news up next. Stay tuned.